Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a pretty significant shift in federal acquisition.
We certainly are.
It's the upcoming overhaul of the FAR, that's F-A-R, pronounced FAR.
Mm-hmm.
We've gathered our resources to really dig into what some are calling the revolutionary FAR overhaul, maybe FAR 2.0.
Right.
And we want to focus specifically on you, our listeners, at the Defense Acquisition University.
That's the goal.
Our mission today is, well, pretty straightforward. Extract the crucial info, what's changing, why it matters for your work in DoD acquisition, what practical steps you might need to think about, and, the potential upsides and downsides.
And this all kicks off, really, from Executive Order 14275 that was issued back on April 15th, 2025.
Restoring common sense to federal procurement. That's the title.
Right,
Yeah.
the one. And the big objectives. Streamline the FAR, definitely.
Hmm?
Ease the regulatory load. Use clearer language. Plain English is a big theme. And ultimately, boost efficiency and competition in federal contracting.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. The current FAR, it's certainly grown over the years.
Oh, absolutely. Decades of buildup.
Yeah. Sources mention nearly 3,000 directives. So this EIA, it sounds like a direct response to that complexity.
It really is.
What's the core idea driving this reduction?
Well, the central idea in EO 14275 is that the FAR should really only contain provisions that are required by law.
Okay, statute-driven.
Exactly. Or those absolutely necessary for, clarity, usability, effectiveness, or protecting national security. It's a very deliberate paring back.
And the strategic goals for FAR 2.0, faster acquisitions, more competition, better results.
That's the aim.
It's about getting rid of excessive acquisition regulations, really cutting red tape. Now, for someone at DAU, thinking about those sometimes long procurement timelines for defense systems, how might this actually help with that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The intent, by reducing the sheer volume of rules and streamlining things, is absolutely to speed up the acquisition cycle. Cutting non-essential requirements could lead to more agility, potentially getting capabilities to warfighters faster. But, the real impact depends on the final details and how it all gets implemented.
Of course, implementation is key.
Yeah.
And the plain English rewrite, that could certainly help with accessibility.
Definitely.
Another big piece is removing specific policy-driven stuff that isn't strictly required by law. The sources mention things like DEI and wokeness as examples of content being looked at.
Right. The EO directs a review of non-statutory policy insertions.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. It seems like the goal is a fundamental mindset shift, moving away from just regulatory-based, compliance-driven.
Checking the boxes.
Exactly, towards something more practical, efficient, and timely. That's a huge cultural change they're shooting for across the workforce.
It really is. And a major structural change to enable that is the introduction of strategic acquisition guides, or SAGs.
SAGs.
Think of them as OFPP-endorsed buying guides. They'll be non-regulatory, focusing on best practices, innovative techniques, that sort of thing.
So non-regulatory.
Right. A lot of the non-statutory rules we have now, they'd move into these SAGs. The FAR itself would become leaner, just the statutory requirements mostly.
Okay, so the FAR is the legal must-dos, and SAGs are more like advisory how-tos.
That's a good way to put it.
And the initial focus for these SAGs is on areas important for DoD, right?
Right.
IT, professional services, facilities, and construction.
Correct. Those are the first areas targeted.
Now, you said non-regulatory. What does that mean practically for a contracting officer using a SAG? Does it have less weight?
That's a critical point. Non-regulatory means they won't have the same legal force as a FAR provision.
So more flexibility?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
More room for SAOs to tailor approaches, maybe try more innovative solutions. But, and this is important, it puts more responsibility on their judgment.
Right, and on agency guidance and oversight, too, I imagine.
Exactly. To ensure good decisions and consistent application of those best practices.
Okay, let's dive into some specific changes. We're hearing a lot about FAR Part 1, the very foundation.
Yes. Part 1 is getting a significant rewrite. What's really striking are the new guiding principles.
Oh, like what?
Mission efficiency is now explicitly number one.
Okay.
Alongside effective use of taxpayer money, which they define to include valuing time, innovation, merit, customer satisfaction, balance.
That's quite a list.
It is. Plus, maximizing commercial products and services and awarding to superior performers. It really signals a focus shift towards outcomes and value.
So achieving the mission effectively and efficiently, it also sounds like they want to empower teams, maybe reduce some of that risk aversion we sometimes see.
That's definitely the language being used. Empower teams, encourage smarter, faster methods, and even clarify how to request deviations from the FAR.
Deviations can be tricky.
They can. And there's a real push towards active risk management, not just avoidance. Interestingly, the sources also mention proposals to delete subpart 1.2, that's the part about the FAR council roles, and 1.5, which covers public participation in rulemaking.
Deleting public participation. That sounds potentially controversial.
Well, it might streamline things, but yes, it does raise questions about transparency and stakeholder input.
And they're also talking about removing background and context language, trying to be more concise, I guess.
That's the idea.
But couldn't that make it harder for newcomers, maybe people just starting at DAU, to understand the why behind a rule?
That's a very valid concern. Brevity helps experienced folks, maybe, but removing context could mean a steeper learning curve for new acquisition professionals.
So training becomes even more crucial.
Absolutely. Robust training at DAU and within agencies will be vital to fill in those gaps.
Okay, let's shift gears to major systems. FAR Part 34. What's happening there?
The main focus there is streamlining, particularly around testing for Title III DPA components and Earned Value Management System EVMS requirements.
EVMS, right. That's a big one for major programs.
It is. The goal seems to be reducing the documentation burden associated with EVMS, but still using it as a key management tool.
That feels like a balancing act. Cut paperwork, but don't lose oversight on these huge, complex programs.
Precisely. Ensuring streamlining doesn't weaken essential oversight is going to be critical. DAU's curriculum will need to reflect that teach the leaner rules, but still emphasize disciplined program management.
Now, something that's generating a lot of buzz, the sunset provision. Can you explain that?
Ah, yes, this is potentially huge. The RFO introduces a mandatory 4-year sunset clause for all non-statutory FAR provisions.
4 years for everything not required by law.
Everything. Unless the FAR Council actively reviews and renews a provision within that 4-year window, poof, it expires.
Wow.
This applies to existing non-statutory rules and any new ones under FAR 2.0. The idea is continuous evaluation, making sure rules stay relevant.
So it's meant to constantly prune the regulations.
That's the intent.
But 4 years? That sounds like it could create, well, a lot of instability for government and industry.
That's the main concern you hear. It could lead to what some are calling regulatory churn.
Churn, yeah.
Potential for higher compliance costs, uncertainty. You'd constantly have to monitor what's up for review, what might expire.
So it's not just learning new rules now, but constantly tracking potential changes every few years.
Exactly. Vigilance will be key.
What about other parts of the FAR? Is the impact widespread?
Oh yes, it's expected to touch many areas. Part 12, commercial products and services. Likely to see significant cuts to non-statutory requirements, aligning with that commercial focus.
Makes sense.
Parts 22 on labor laws and 23 on environment, energy, safety. They'll also likely be reshaped to hew closer to statutory mandates.
In Part 52, the clauses.
Part 52 will probably need massive updates. Just think of all the cross-references and potentially many clauses being removed or changed.
The sources estimate, what, around 45% of current FAR clauses are non-statutory?
That's the number being discussed, and that includes some really basic operational clauses, like SAM, registration, 52.2047, annual reps and certs, 52.204-8, IDC ordering procedures, 52.21618, order limits, 52.21619, even allowable cost and payment, 52.2167.
Whoa, those are fundamental. Removing or changing those could really impact day-to-day work.
Absolutely. Major practical implications.
So for you listening at DAU, what does that mean for training right now if these core clauses might change?
It means DAU has to be incredibly nimble. Curriculum needs to adapt fast. Training will have to zero in on the underlying statutory requirements that remain.
The foundation.
Right, and guide people on how to operate effectively without the non-statutory language they might be used to. More emphasis on the why, on critical thinking, because the prescriptive how might be gone.
Okay, let's talk rollout. How's this actually happening? It sounds complex.
It's a phased approach. Phase I is happening now, basically. The FAR Council is issuing model class deviation text piece by piece.
Last deviations, temporary exceptions, right?
Exactly. Temporary exceptions to the current FAR for certain types of actions. Agencies are expected to adopt these quickly by issuing their own deviations.
Okay, so temporary rules first.
Then comes phase 2, formal rulemaking. That's where they'll take feedback from the deviation phase, public comments, and develop the final FAR revisions.
So adopt first, finalize later. That's an interesting approach.
It is.
It means the workforce will be operating under these temporary deviations for a while. That seems like it could create uncertainty, like we talked about with the sunset.
It definitely introduces a period of flux. Adaptability is key. GSA, for example, already issued class deviations for Parts 1 and 34.
So it's moving fast.
Very fast, which means the workforce and DAU's training needs to be just as agile.
Who's driving all this? Who are the key players?
OFPP, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, is really spearheading it, working closely with the FAR Council, which is GSA, DOD, and NASA. And federal agencies themselves have a big role. They have to designate senior officials to help rewrite their own supplemental regulations, like the DFARs for DOD, to align with the new FAR.
Got it. And the timeline, what are the key dates people in DoD acquisition should keep an eye on?
Well, it's aggressive. The EO was April 15th, 2025. Agencies named officials by April 30th. OMB memos and guidance came out in early May.
Right.
The rolling release of these model class deviations started in May and is ongoing. The next big date is October 12th, 2025.
What happens then?
That's 180 days from the EO. By then, OFPP and the FAR Council are supposed to complete their initial review and take the First Amendment actions.
Okay, so initial changes formalized by October.
That seems to be the target. Formal rulemaking follows that deviation phase, and then whenever the final rule is effective, that 4-year sunset clock starts ticking.
Wow. That is a tight schedule. It really underscores the need for the DoD acquisition workforce to be ready to adapt quickly.
No question.
Which brings us right to the Defense Acquisition University's role. How does FAR 2.0 specifically impact DAU and its mission?
DAU's role is absolutely pivotal here. There's a clear mandate for DAU working with FAI and the FAR Council to develop updated, modernized training.
Training based
on the deviations as they come out, and then the strategic acquisition guides, the SAGs as they're developed.
So the curriculum needs a major overhaul. What should that updated training include?
Well, it needs to weave in those new guiding principles from the revised Part 1 we talked about.
Right, mission, efficiency, value.
Exactly. It needs to teach students how to interpret and apply the SAGs, that non-regulatory guidance. Courses on Parts 1, 12, 34 obviously need big updates. And DAU should probably mirror the FAR 2.0 plain language effort in its own materials. Plus, with the sunset clause and rolling implementation, continuous learning modules become even more vital.
Staying current will be an ongoing effort.
Absolutely.
Does this also mean DAU faculty need to change how they teach?
I think so, yes. The approach probably needs to shift away from just compliance.
Memorizing rules.
Right, towards more practical application, critical thinking, case studies, simulations maybe. Faculty will need to equip students to use sound business judgment, especially if COs get more discretion.
And teaching risk management, not just risk avoidance.
Definitely. Aligning with that revised Part 1 principle, FAR 2.0 could actually be a catalyst for teaching innovation in procurement and for training people how to handle ambiguity, because there will be ambiguity.
So preparing DAU students isn't just about new rules, it's about a different skill set, a more adaptable mindset.
That's it, exactly. Understanding a more agile, principles-based FAR. Honing decision-making, negotiation, communication skills. Being ready for digital tools and automation, likely coming with FAR 2.0.
And understanding the impact on contractors, too.
Yes, understanding the whole ecosystem.
This also sounds like a big opportunity for DAU in terms of research and thought leadership.
A huge opportunity. DAU can analyze how effective FAR 2.0 actually is, the sunset provision, the SAGs.
Measure the impact.
Right. Contribute to developing best practices under the new system. Examine the effects on the workforce morale, skills, provide objective analysis of the challenges, and, serve as a forum for dialogue among everyone involved.
Okay, let's pull back for a wider view. What are the potential upsides of FAR 2.0 that the sources highlight, the advantages?
Well, the big hopes are faster acquisition cycles, lower barriers for small businesses, and new entrants to government contracting.
That would be significant.
Cutting bureaucratic bloat, reducing regulatory complexity and the burden of compliance, and giving COs more latitude, more discretion.
Those all sound like worthy goals, but what about the other side? What risks or concerns are being raised?
There are definitely concerns. Regulatory instability from the sunset clause, and that phased rollout is a big one.
The churn.
Exactly. Concerns about the adopt first, finalize later approach, possibly limiting public input on the final rules. Potential negative impacts on socioeconomic programs if non-statutory EO-based clauses are removed or weakened. Implementation risks guidance gaps during the transition.
That seems likely with such a fast pace.
Yes. Also, potentially fewer opportunities for stakeholder input, especially maybe for small businesses. Uncertainty for contractors who've invested in the current system. And the subtle one, maybe losing some institutional knowledge embedded in the current regs.
And it seems the whole role of using procurement for policy objectives is changing too.
Yes, that's a definite undercurrent. A move away from using procurement as the main tool for non-statutory policies.
Like deleting that fulfilling public policy objectives statement.
Right. And the potential removal of clauses like the one on paid sick leave for contractor employees, FER 22.21005, is cited as an example.
So DAU's ethics and policy courses will need to tackle those changing dynamics.
They absolutely will, exploring the why behind those shifts.
Okay, so bringing it back to you, the listener in the DoD acquisition workforce, maybe studying at DAU, what are some concrete, actionable things you should be doing right now to get ready for FAR 2.0?
Okay, number one, actively monitor acquisition.gov. That's where the updates, the deviations, the draft sags will appear. Stay glued to it.
Check it regularly. Got it.
Number two, if your agency or the FAR Council asked for feedback, engage. Provide input. Your perspective matters.
Don't be passive.
Right. Third, prioritize continuous learning. Use DAU resources, other professional development, anything focused on FAR 2.0.
Keep learning.
Fourth, shift your focus. Don't just try to memorize new rules. Try to understand the principles behind the changes. Why are they doing this?
Understand the why.
Exactly. And finally, look for chances in your current job to practice critical thinking and sound judgment. Get ready for that less prescriptive environment.
Okay, that's practical advice. Let's quickly summarize the big takeaways then.
That's good.
This revolutionary FAR overhaul is a major change, driven by EO 14275. The goals are streamlining and efficiency.
Core goals, yes.
It brings new guiding principles, these non-regulatory sags, that big 4-year sunset clause, and a phased rollout.
All with significant implications for you in the DoD acquisition workforce.
So staying informed, prioritizing that continuous learning, those are key.
Absolutely paramount. This deep dive hopefully gives you a solid foundation for understanding what's coming. We really encourage you to take those actionable steps to prepare.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. As we shift towards this more principles-based approach, how will that fundamentally change how you make decisions and manage risk every day? What new skills, what competencies will be the most critical for you to succeed in this evolving landscape?
That's the crucial question to ponder as you continue your own deep dive into the FAR overhaul.